Welcome to the Farm to School podcast, where you will hear stories of how youth thrive and farmers prosper when we grow, cook, and eat delicious, nutritious local foods in schools.
We're your hosts. I am Rick Sherman.
And I'm Michelle Markiston, and we are Farm to School coordinators for the state of Oregon.
Hey, Michelle.
Yes, Rick. What are we doing today?
You know what we're doing today? I'll give you a hint, okay? We are doing critters in the school garden. Critters meaning specifically chickens this time.
Okay.
There are a lot of critters and things in the garden.
Do lots of people have chickens in the school gardens?
We're going to find that out. I know in our state, we keep track of that. And last count, we had over 40 schools that had them.
That's amazing.
And it didn't
just in Oregon.
Yeah, and it didn't always used to be that. And so I reached out to my good friend and counterpart on the other side of the country.
Well, a lot of people also want to keep chickens out of their garden, right? Because don't they kind of get all over the place and eat plants?
They can tend to destroy a garden, and if they run amok. And matter of fact, it's really good to let them out when your garden is done for the year because they till it and they fertilize it, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
But yeah, it's best to keep them in a run or a coop and run, so they're kind of contained away from predators. But we'll get into that. So this guy I talked to, he's my good friend Sam Ullery from Washington, D.C., and he's my counterpart. It's not the Department of Ed there. It's the Office of State Superintendent of Education. And fun fact.
I love fun facts.
Did you know of our audiences? We have, I think our biggest audience is Portland, Oregon, followed by Seattle, and then our number 3 is Texas. Washington, D.C. Oh, and so unbeknownst to me, did you know that? I didn't. Had I been known,
I did not be known that.
No, had I been known that, I would have marketed more, but I don't need to because they're already here and listening. So, hey, DC, how you doing?
Well, I think it's all those national downloads, and then our friends in DC are posting at other places. So thanks, team.
I hope so.
What are some other critters?
Ducks. Ducks are a good one.
Gosh,
they're a little different. You just need a little pond for them to, like a kiddie pool for them to be in, and they're just different. They don't destroy gardens though, but they give you eggs. And then there's some gardens and farms, school farms in Oregon that have bigger critters, like you said, goats, cows, things like that, pigs.
When I worked at Sterling College, we had turkeys.
Oh yeah,
that we had for Thanksgiving feasts. Yeah. We had cows for milk and meat.
Yeah,
we had sheep for wool.
Yeah. We have a lot of wild turkeys here in Oregon. I see them all the time. They're in the road.
True.
You have to kind of drive
There's
around.
wild turkeys in Berkeley, too. Have you seen that?
In Berkeley?
Yeah, downtown Berkeley, California.
No,
it's like
I did
run
not know
amok
that.
with wild turkeys.
I did not know that. That was unbeknownst to me. That's the word of the day is unbeknownst.
All right, let's see how many times we could use it.
Okay, sounds good. Well, anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk to Sam, and we'll see you on the other side. With me is Sam Ullery. He is actually my counterpart in Washington, D.C. with the Office of State Superintendent, OSSE, Office of State Superintendent of Education. Did I get that right, Sam?
You did. The Office of this, it's a mouthful. The Office of the State Superintendent of Education.
Why don't you guys just call it Department of Ed?
Because DC is a weird place. It's not a state. We don't have a Department of Ag. It's a weird place.
It's not a state. It's a big city, but it's its own thing. But you've been a pioneer in the school garden world for a long time. It's kind of strange. I was talking to you right before this, and we've kind of had a parallel path. We both started about the same time. When did you start in this job?
I started in 2011. Okay. So I've been there I've been in this position for 13 years.
Okay. When I started a year later in 2012, there really wasn't that many positions like we had. How did you discover it? What were you doing at the time? Let's step back in our Wayback Machine to a younger Sam, younger Sam Ullery.
Well, I was teaching high school environmental science at a charter school in Washington, D.C., and was really already into getting kids outside, learning. There was a large grass field next to this school, and I was able to get a group of students together, and we built a school garden at that high school. And it was a pretty incredible experience because in 2010, DC was considering a new piece of legislation called the DC Healthy Schools Act, and they were, like any piece of legislation, they were inviting the public to come testify. And I brought some of my students down to City Hall, and they testified in front of council to allow, pass this legislation. And part of this legislation was creating my position, my future position. I didn't know it at the time. I actually was there to promote healthy eating in schools and reimbursing for locally served, which was also in that legislation. But it got passed, and the job posting came out, and I applied, and they hired me. So
I imagine things were so new with you, you had to kind of create your own way as well. Is that right?
Yeah, if you look, I looked at my job description a while ago. I was just curious and remembered back there was so little known about the state of school gardens in DC at the time. And one of the expectations that's in my job description is that I was to maintain all of the school gardens in DC. Well, we found out pretty quickly that was, there are over 100 school gardens in DC, so that was not going to be something that I was going to do.
You better get busy, man. Yeah. Well, that's a lot of weeding.
So, yeah, a lot of the early days was just figuring out what was going on, where the gardens were, what the needs were, what type of supports we could realistically provide and all that. So
Wow.
I've come a long way.
Now, even before that, you kind of had a love for all things environmental-ish and stuff. You were in the Peace Corps, is that correct?
I was.
Okay, can you tell me about when did that happen, and where did you go to serve for that?
Yeah, oh my gosh, you're going way back.
I told you we're going in the way back machine.
So yes, after I graduated college, I joined the Peace Corps, and for those of you that, for everyone who's done the Peace Corps, you don't really get to choose where you go. I was very lucky. I was assigned Vanuatu, which is in the South Pacific. It's halfway between Fiji and Australia. One of the projects I worked on was a chicken project with the community. So we got a grant and we built a chicken business. So we got about 50 hens and started selling eggs. And that was one way for them to generate income in the community. And that's where I think I kind of got my love of chickens.
I'm a big fan of the show Survivor, and I know they've been there too. That was kind of fun to see, like they're very isolated away from everyone there, but a very tiny couple little islands there. Yeah. Oh, that must have been a really neat experience for you. Well, good for you.
Well, the best part about Peace Corps was I met my wife there also.
And so you got back, graduated from college, you got your ed degree. Again, just like me, got my ed degree, although I never taught. I just went into the food service realm. You taught I saw you taught at Thurgood Marshall. That's that charter school you talked about, right? A high school, correct?
Yes, I taught. So I got my master's in teaching at Teachers College in New York City, and then taught in the part of that program. That was actually a Peace Corps program where, you go to school in the evening and teach during the day. So it was really difficult. I was teaching high school environmental studies and earth sciences at another charter school in the Bronx. And I did that for 4 years while I was getting my master's, and then moved to DC and taught at the Marshall Academy.
Okay. And so, and I'm sure it's the same for you, but when I got in my position, I found out really quickly there was a lot of roadblocks like, we don't recommend schools serve garden produce. And so I had to figure out a way to do that, to make it safe. And And getting to the subject of this show, we don't recommend that they keep chickens at schools. There's just too many things that go wrong. So I'd like trying to solve for a problem. Well, how can we make it safe so they can do that? And so I know you did the same thing. So, and I think you beat me to the punch there. I think you were the first program that actually had a protocol, and I still refer to your website and your thing that you created about how to go about raising, the steps to raise chickens safely at schools. Can you tell me how you kind of stumbled into that whole subject and why chickens, why in schools?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, in the first couple of years of my position, I was really trying to figure out, which schools had gardens and how they were using their gardens. And what I found out was that there were some schools that had chickens, and I thought that was really cool. As I did some more digging, it became apparent that while those schools had chickens, there was no system in place to really monitor the health of the hens and also the people. So these were very ambitious educators that, they were doing what they were getting chickens in their schools because that, is a really cool thing, but there was no process in place to ensure that that was being done in a safe and healthy way. And I know you understand like some of the things that could happen with having any animals in schools and chickens, and especially consuming the eggs. So that's really where I got into it, was because it was already happening in some schools, and I wanted to make sure that you don't want something to happen like, someone to get sick and then it squashes the whole, you get yourself set back for 10 or 15 years and makes it very difficult. So
Sure.
I wanted to put some processes in place. It was also not necessarily legal to have chickens. At the time, there was legislation that didn't allow backyard chickens. It didn't say anything about
locally,
schools, but
locally in DC,
locally in
correct?
DC,
Right.
correct, yeah. And so that was another concern, that if chickens weren't allowed in people's backyards in DC, then most likely they weren't going to be allowed in schools.
Mm-hmm. I found that out too. And I made sure I jumped in and said locally there, because in the state where I live in, it's all based on municipalities. And like in my little town that I live in, you can have a flock of up to 12 chickens in your backyard.
Mhm.
And Portland, Oregon, I mean, that's a really big popular place to have chickens urbanly, if
Yeah.
I can use that term. And so it just depends on the town you live in. I've yet to hear of one that has not allowed them, but there's usually restrictions on roosters, or like they don't like loud animals like barking dogs. Although, really in my town nobody does anything about them, but it's there in the town ordinance that you shouldn't have roosters in city limits.
Mhm.
Although a couple of neighbors of mine have them, and I live in the city limits of a town, and I don't mind. I get up early anyway, and I kind of like hearing them go off in the morning. But I guess I'm the exception to the rule. I don't mind. It just reminds me of being back on the farm or whatever.
Yeah.
So even though I was never on one, but if I wish I were on one or whatever, I can pretend. But so that's important. But I always found too that, okay, you've mastered school gardens, you're doing everything right. You get bored with the school garden. What's the next step in the progression? And that whole animal husbandry thing is pretty cool. And especially once people figure out that raising chickens, it's easier to do that than raise cats or dogs. You don't really have to train them. They take care of themselves. I think the biggest thing for us living in a rural place, not in a big city, is you have to worry about predators more, like coyotes and things like that. So you have to build your run and your coop like pretty fortified and stuff, and make sure they can't dig in, and but the things still happen. Have you heard of like scary stories in DC of chickens or anything like that happening?
I have not heard of any scary stories with chickens. Well, first I'll say that I agree with you about chickens being kind of the 2.0, I guess, of school gardens. If you kind of get like you're ready for the next step. I also have seen this kind of also the gateway for a lot of students that may not want to get their hands dirty, or they don't think growing things is their jam, but the chickens are interesting to them. So that's how they kind of get into the school garden. And then the same with the community too. There might be folks in the community that had chickens growing up. They're not really interested in growing tomatoes, but they'll come and clean the chicken coop on the summer break. So it's another element that just diversifies the school garden and gets more people involved. And we, so part of our process that we created is to make sure that we don't have these scary stories. And I'm probably the last person that people would tell these scary stories to, because then I'd have to probably tell DC Health. But I don't think any of that, we do have predators in DC. I mean, we have big birds, we have foxes, we have things that would love to eat chickens. And then there's also just get curious about people or the chickens. So, but our process, we have a couple of inspections, and the first inspection is to make sure, and that this is the inspection that DC Health does. They come to the school before the school purchases chickens to make sure that the site is safe, but also a good place for chickens and people.
Oh, that's
cool. So they'll say, okay, this courtyard or this part of the school grounds looks good. You can move forward. And so then once they get the okay, the school gets the okay, they go and they build or they buy the run, the coop, and it does need to be fully enclosed. That's part of the requirement. And then DC Health comes back and checks that coop meets all the requirements. And then they can get their chickens. And then DC Health comes back a third time just to see that everything is in place. So there's a lot of, and these aren't like, and this is more from, we're here to help you, we're here to support you, not like we're here to get you. There's a lot of back and forth between myself, DC Health, and the school, just to help them get to where they need to be so that they can have a successful program.
Now, is there a cost associated with those visits for the health department?
There is no cost for essentially the school has to get a permit, and that's all part of the permitting process. In addition to that, they have to submit a plan, a management plan, and that template, as well as some examples, are on our website. There's no cost to any of that. So that's all. There is a cost though, which is one of the big downsides of I think one of the barriers of having chickens in DC, and that's the cost of all the stuff like buying the equipment and the chickens and the coop, the run, the food. But more than that, it's that in order to get a permit, schools have to have a health certificate for each individual chicken on their school grounds. And in order to get a health certificate, that chicken has to be looked at by a veterinarian. And so that is the biggest barrier, because veterinarians cost money. It can be quite expensive. I've heard anywhere between $80 to $100 per chicken each year. To get them to get them their health certificate.
Yeah.
So for a school, I mean, they're not going to have a bunch of chickens. They're not going to have, typically they have 3 or 4 hens, but that adds up.
Yeah. And probably, I'm guessing the vet would probably come to the site rather than putting them all in pet carriers and bringing them into a vet, I'm guessing.
So what used to happen, what we used to have was this business called Rent-A-Coop.
Oh.
And they're still in business, but they're no longer servicing Washington, D.C. They changed their model. They're working more in the suburbs like Virginia and Maryland. But in the early days, we were working closely with this company, Rent-A-Coop, and this made it very easy for schools to get hens because Rent-A-Coop isn't what it describes. It's rent-a-coop. So schools would pay for everything they needed, the chickens, the coop, the food, and it would all be delivered to their school. And they would have it for a period of time. I think it was like 6 or 8 weeks, they could decide. And then Rent-A-Coop would come pick it up and take it away. And that dealt with a lot of the obstacles because at their farm, at the Rent-A-Coop farm, they had their whole flock inspected.
Yeah.
And they had, one inspection for the flock, and then it was taken care of. Now we don't have that, so we have many, many fewer schools that are having chickens just because it's more difficult to do the annual health certificate.
Wow, I did not know that about that process that you'd had. And I think you're pretty unique there, but I would say I like it because what happens in most places, I'm guessing, and what happens here is people just do it, and if they have problems and they deal with it and they move on. But your way, it actually forces people to get them to do a plan, which I really like. Rather than just go into it and try to figure things out and make mistakes. If you have a plan, you will avoid a lot of the mistakes anyway. So I really like that. I like that piece, and that's a good lesson learned for other states. And I'm curious, for other states, I would really like to know, what do you guys do in your states? Drop me a line. If you go to Farm to School Podcast OSU, if you Google that, go to our website, and there's a little button that says, send us, an email. I would really like to hear what other states do in their school gardens, especially to see that. But yeah, I imagine that's kind of a barrier for some schools to do that. They just don't want to deal with the hassle of the regulation, I guess.
But it's so worth it.
Yeah.
If you can swing it. And there's some really creative ways to raise money. I've seen a school that I work with raised enough money to pay for the program. So all those fees I just talked about, by doing a silent auction at their school to receive naming rights for the chickens. So people were putting up money to name the chickens. Now the chickens got crazy names because the kids got to name them, but they were able to raise enough money for the whole program. So there's some ways to make it work. You just have to be creative.
Just to see the kids care for the chickens, and that's a whole, it's amazing to see kids get their hands in the dirt and care for the planet and figure out how to grow things. But then when they add that care of caring for an animal and stuff, it can be really special. And to see the chickens are so resilient. They get used to kids. They don't really freak out when they get at an early age, when they get picked up and stuff. Oh, and I wanted to talk about that. So I noticed in your protocols, you pay special attention, like when you do raise chickens and when you go in there, they carry a lot of bacteria that causes listeria and salmonella. So you always say, you should wash your hands afterwards, obviously. And you have some protocols about dealing with the eggs. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So the eggs, I think first and foremost, people ask most often, can we sell the eggs, or what do we do with the eggs? because of health code stuff in DC, they are not allowed to sell the eggs, but they can give them away for a donation or use them in their cooking class or in their club or whatever, and they can eat them that way. So yeah, I mean, these eggs are not like the eggs that we buy in grocery stores. Sure, they don't need to be refrigerated.
Yeah, they have what you call a bloom on them that kind of protects them, but they can get dirty, right? They can, they come out of the same place where the eggs go or the chickens go to the bathroom, so they can get dirty. And I know you've talked about cleaning them and stuff like that before. So, in our state, we have some of the same issues with. You have to have inspection by USDA to sell eggs, but I think you can sell eggs a little bit easier in our state at like a local farmer's market, but you still have to go through some hoops to do that. And like you said, you can donate them or use them in your cooking class too, with some steps. But I would encourage people just to look at the local regulations in your state on that. So every state's different. So yeah. And I would say that when I was initially researching, what was already out there, when we realized that we had schools with chickens but no process, there was not a whole lot about a program, developing a district-wide program, but there was a lot of safety information. And I did find some great information on egg safety. There's an egg council, and as you said, there's local jurisdictions that all have health safety rules. But one of the things that I learned about eggs that I didn't know, that I was fascinated by, is the eggshell is permeable. And so if you wash your egg when it's got some dirt on it, you could actually get the dirt inside the egg because that eggshell is permeable and the dirt gets sucked into the egg. So our recommendation is to dry, soft brush the dirt off of it and actually not wash it, just get the dirt off. If it's really gross, then you just keep, you can get running water over it, but don't like soak it in water, just have the water running over it. Yeah, I know. I've seen some other people that do soak it in vinegar and stuff, but and there's a temperature thing, but the easiest way to do it the safest way is probably what you're talking about, especially the ones, some of them come out very clean, and those are the great ones. And I think one of the keys also is keep really clean nesting boxes. And so like with pine shavings or something like that, a lot of fresh pine shavings, and then they'll come out cleaner too. And then I found too, like, there's so much help out there. If you go to backyardchickens.com, that's a really good resource for anything.
That's a great site.
Yeah, there's literally thousands of sortable subjects. Like, I had a chicken in my backyard pretty much explode on me for some reason. I have no idea why. And I got into the backyard chickens and like, what's going on there? And there was so many people that gave me help, and from just different, very specific problems with chickens to general ones to coop designs. There's pictures, different breeds. It's just, you can spend hours going down that rabbit hole. So pretty cool.
And I did.
Yeah, right. Well, Sam, I thank you so much for being here and on the show. And it's always a great pleasure to talk to you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been great. Thanks for talking about chickens.
All right.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sharing your story with us. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, it was so fun talking to Sam. Farm to School was written, directed, and produced by Rick Sherman and Michelle Markestein, with production support from Leanne Locker of Oregon State University. Thank you, Leanne.
And was made possible by a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture. The content and ideas of the Farm to School podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Education, or the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA, Oregon Department of Ed, and Oregon State University are equal opportunity providers and employers.
Do you want to learn more about Farm to School? Check out other episodes, show notes, contact information, and much more by Googling Farm to School Podcast OSU.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Please stop by Farm to School Podcast OSU and leave us a note or just say hello or give us an idea for a new episode.
Thank you. We'll see you next time, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.